Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Migrating Legacy ERP Systems. My name is Stephanie Neer. I am the marketing manager here at KSM Consulting, which is an Indianapolis-based technology, data, and management consulting firm. A few things to mention as we get started. If not already selected by default, we ask you to please set your microphone to mute upon speaking. Additionally, we welcome you to use the chat functionality should you have any questions throughout the presentation. We will do our best to answer them throughout or at the end. Now to get started, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Carrie Phillips. Carrie is KSM Consulting's Director of Business Performance. He leads a dynamic team that helps businesses work smarter and be more effective. He has extensive experience facilitating the transformation of operations in organizations. His role as a strategic leader allows for him to deeply understand the needs of an organization and the complexities of transformational technology. Carrie leads the effort in aligning people, process, and technology to ensure project success. With that, I will turn things over to Carrie.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. I really appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining live. And if you're planning to listen to this later, thanks for doing that as well. What we hope to accomplish over the next period of time here is to be able to highlight some of the things that we've learned and that we share with clients who are considering either migrating or modernizing their ERP systems in their enterprise. So we will go through, obviously, we're going to have to be a little bit high level as we go through this. There is probably an infinite number of details that need to be considered when you're thinking about a migration or modernization, and even getting into that work and how you work your way through the assessment and what to do. We're going to hit some high notes, a few things we've learned that we think are really important, and then we're going to try and leave time at the end for any questions. So our agenda for today, we are going to cover a little bit of history of enterprise resource planning systems, talk a little bit about risk in migrating and specifically risk in not migrating. We'll talk a little bit through the complexities in a project of this scale, and you look at replacing what is probably a backbone system within your enterprise. We'll talk about some of the key steps that you have to about to make sure that when you do plan to migrate that it's successful. We'll touch a little bit on some of the opportunities this will allow that your enterprise to do in terms of evolving into modernizing and becoming better. And we'll touch a little bit on how to choose the best solution. Okay, so first we'll talk a little bit about ERP history. So primarily when people think about ERPs, the first thing they'll think of is accounting and the financial systems that are involved in your enterprise, whether you're a for-profit business, a nonprofit, even a school system or a city or a town, all use some sort of financial system. And certainly enterprise resource planning systems encompass that, but they may also include things like order management, customer database, inventory, human resources. All of those kind of functionalities can roll up into an ERP. And so as you're beginning to think about that, it becomes fairly complex and touches on every part of the enterprise. It's a good way, these systems are good ways to optimize and streamline all the work that has to be associated from group to group. And you want to make sure, as you're thinking about where your current system is, how old is it and how long has it been since you've modernized that? So let's look back a little bit historically. One of the earliest platforms for ERPs was the AS400 system from IBM, which came out a little over 30 years ago. Many companies have this in place. My previous employer, in fact, used an AS400 system, and I worked with it for many years prior to our migration to a new system. And many of the clients that I've worked with since joining KSMC have been on an AS400 platform or some other similar type of platform. And so for the most part, I think generally people agree that AS400s are reaching, if not the end of life, certainly they're not what people would consider to be a modern platform. Doesn't mean that it has to be replaced, and that's part of the things we'll talk about here in this webinar. From a standpoint of being modern or whether or not it's outdated, you know, at a time span of over 3 decades ago when this initially came out, most of the people who were involved in setting up these systems and changing them over the years are probably reaching near the end of their careers, and they're beginning to cycle out of the workforce, and this presents a little bit of a risk. How many more people will be available who can make changes to these systems, who can maintain them, what's the support look like. Generally speaking, every day there's fewer and fewer individuals who are comfortable and familiar with how to make changes in these older ERP platforms. The second risk that you face is that newer generations are coming into the workforce. Literally, new employees coming out of college have grown up holding computers in their hands, and to come into an employer and look at a major part of their day looking at a green and black screen is often not the most appealing to them, and doesn't feel like they're working for a modern, cutting edge company. So knowing that and thinking about how your potential employees and how your workforce is going to perceive this significant tool they interact with day to day can be a reason why modernizing your technology becomes very important. The second is that there just wasn't the kind of processes and workflow 30 years ago that exists today. Things were done from a batch function. You would batch up part of your transactions, and then you would download those to a different part of your system. Where today you can get more real-time updates across the system with a modern database, and it allows your business to react more quickly. It gives you access to more real-time data, and you can make better data-driven decisions than you can on these older platforms. In many cases, organizations that have ran for 30 plus years on an older platform don't know how much better they could be doing things because they just don't know what they don't know. Okay, so some of the risks in not modernizing, we've highlighted here some sentiments that we've heard from clients in real time activities that we've done with them around other parts. The complicated thing about an ERP is it touches other parts of the business as well as its core functionality around finance. So you may have another package, a more modern package that's bolted onto your ERP, and that may go through regular updates periodically. And sometimes those updates can create problems in your existing platform because you've had to go through and customize the software to fit this added on package. And those system updates will cause your system to fail. And we've had instances where that's occurred and there's been downtime, and you can get as serious a repercussion as missing payroll potentially, depending on how that happens and when it happens. You'll spend hours manually downloading and syncing reports where newer systems generate those automatically. And a lot of times we hear from clients that they feel like their growth of their enterprise, the growth of their business is limited because the ERP is just holding them back in the ways it has to do things. So these are all potential risks that you should think about as you consider whether your current ERP system is reaching the end of life or whether it's important for you to modernize and move on to a different system. Okay. So with that being the case, you may think, well, why does anyone hesitate to migrate? It seems like if we're crashing and the support is dwindling and it's unappealing to our workforce and it's limiting our business, why wouldn't we just migrate? Seems like a simple answer. Partially because it's a really, really big decision. It's very expensive at times. It can create an absolute disruption into your business. And one of the biggest things we find is that everyone involved with the enterprise cares a lot about it, and they want to make sure they're making the right decisions for the enterprise. And an ERP tends to be a very long-term decision. This isn't something that you cycle out every 2 or 3 years. At least I hope for your sake you don't try to cycle it out every 2 to 3 years. I hope that it's something you do, that has like a 10, 15, 20-year lifespan. And as we look at these legacy systems, many of them have had a 30-year lifespan. So that makes it a big decision. And it's really hard for the leaders of the organization to think about what will our business look like 10, 20 years from now? Are we buying the right kind of package? Are we getting the right kind of system to really fit what our business will not only be today, but what it'll look like 20 years from now? So when they factor in the expense and the disruption and the impact of a long-term decision, it's natural that it creates some hesitation to make a decision to modernize. The other piece is that many of these systems have been very customized over the years, and there's a certain comfort with how we've always done things. You hear that quite frequently. This is how we've always done things. And it's natural to have a fear of change. And in some cases, many cases, we see instances where other types of software implementations have been done in the enterprise, and they didn't always go very well. And so that fear of past bad experience tends to make people hesitate to want to make a decision to change such a crucial part of their enterprise. Again, ERPs tend to touch almost every part of the enterprise. And if they had a bad experience with a small piece, it makes them more hesitant to want to pick up and run with a replacement of something that touches almost every part of their enterprise. So what are some of the other complexities that are around this before you, now that we've sort of understood what are the things that may make you hesitate, let's talk through some of the complexities. And as we address those, it will resolve some of the hesitation. So one of the very first things that you'll need to look at and understand is, what are the requirements for my business? And we often find that this is in and of itself a rewarding exercise for an enterprise to go through and identify what truly are all their business requirements. The second thing you'll need to do is consider some assessments of what are the available solutions that are out in the market today. They're probably quite different than they were the last time the organization looked at an ERP. And so what are the existing options for today? And then you make a best fit of functionality to those requirements. So in terms of the requirements, generally one of the best places to start is with a business process map. Map out all the different things that the enterprise does. What are all the interactions that take place? How do you interact with your clients? How do you interact with vendors? How do you interact with the employees? What does the HR system look like? What's the payroll system look like? Accounts payables, receivables. You map all that process out, and you begin to understand what is the most important functionality that we have to have in the system. There will clearly be some parts of the ERP that are must-have functionality. We cannot operate the business. We can't run the enterprise without this functionality moving forward. We would list all those as must-have requirements. Then there's a second band of requirements that we typically like to group things in that are very useful and important to the business. It's possible we could survive without them, but it would be very inconvenient. And then there's generally a third grouping we make around nice to have functionality, things that we wish we could do today, but we can't. So we're clearly able to run the enterprise without those, but it would be really nice to have if we could do those. And so with those kind of big buckets in mind, you can begin to sort of take your business process and develop requirements out of that, and then group those requirements into must have, useful, and nice to have groupings. This will be important as you begin to factor the fit. Then the next thing is to go into the assessment of what software is available in the market and how they would fit with your business. And this can be a pretty time-consuming process. It's important to make sure that you've surveyed the market and found the software providers that are out there that could fit your enterprise. Some are very specifically designed to fit the kind of enterprise that you're in. For example, if you have a very project-based enterprise, a construction endeavor, or an event planning or hosting, there are projectized software that fits that ERP better. If you run an e-commerce business, there are certainly platforms that are better designed around e-commerce than would be oriented more towards a projectized organization. So it's good to understand what ERP systems are available and which ones are designed to fit your core business. The next thing you want to look at from an assessment standpoint is their implementation partner network. Most of the ERP systems on the market today either provide a limited amount of implementation services or they have a very small staff that can do implementation services. Primarily, they're there to develop and build great software, and then they have a partner network that helps them implement that software. And so you want to take a close look at what the partner network looks like within your area or around the country that can come service what you're doing. You need to make sure that you're finding a partner that's going to be very experienced and highly available and understands the software and hopefully understands a little bit about your business. And then together you can look at whether that software and that partner would be a good fit for you. And then there's a third piece I want to consider in an assessment, and that's around the viability and how much investment's going on from the software provider in their platform. Have they been around for a long time? Have they made a lot of investment? Maybe they've changed hands a few times. Maybe they haven't been acquired by someone. You want to make sure you understand how viable is the software and how much are they investing in it. Because again, you're probably making a long-term decision for an ERP replacement or a migration or modernization. And you want to make sure that you're finding a platform that's going to be around for the duration of your decision and that they're going to continue to invest in that software and support it, and it's going to stay viable for you over the lifespan that you want to use it. So those are all the different things you'll want to consider as you begin to assess which ERP packages should we look at more closely. So then you find, so let's say we've narrowed that down to 3 or 4 different solutions, like the partner networks for those. We think it's a good fit for our enterprise. They're going to be around for the long haul. We've got all of our requirements, and so now we have to figure out what we think is the best fit. So first of all, as you think about your requirements, one thing we've learned as we go through some of these implementations is that oftentimes it's not what enterprises tend to gravitate to is not what are the best requirements or the most important requirements, but who was best within the organization at writing their requirements. And so you have to be very careful that you don't have the group that was best at writing the requirements or had the most free time to write the requirements become the driving factor for the ERP. You have to really understand what is the most important part of the business and what should the requirements be first. And you have to filter out a little bit loudest voices or who was best at writing requirements and make sure that you've drilled down into the most important pieces. That can often be hard and takes a little bit of introspection, and sometimes a third party is helpful to go through and analyze your business and analyze the requirements and make sure that you're getting good alignment around definition to importance, and not just take the group that was best at defining and letting them drive the overall purpose of the ERP. Once you feel like you've filtered your requirements and you understand truly what those are, then it's good to build a matrix that says, I've taken this software package and this option, and I've compared it to my requirements in terms of how important is my requirement to how well does the software fit. So let's just pick a simple example for a moment. Let's say that as part of your enterprise, you have accounts payable. Most people do. Let's say accounts payable are very important to your business. And so let's say you call that a 5 on a 1 to 5 requirement scale, 5 being a must-have. Then you look at the feasibility of the software and the way it handles accounts payable compared to how you would like to handle accounts payable. And you say that it's a 5 in terms of the way that handles it. A quick simple math, 5 times 5, that's 25 in terms of the weighting of the fit to the must-have. And then you just go through all your requirements and you go to the software and you just do a simple matrix like that to see how can the ERP fit with the requirements that you need. And this is a real simplified example at a high level. Obviously, the more complex your enterprise, the more complex that analysis can be. But I'm trying to share with you a thought process you can go through about how do I weight the fit of the software to the ability to meet the requirements that I need and that the most important requirements are there. And this requires a little bit of objective evaluation. And sometimes, again, a third party can be helpful to get you through that analysis. What you'll find if you just try to do this internally, again, sometimes the loudest voices or the best at defining the requirements can sway a decision in a direction that you really didn't intend for it to go for your enterprise. So an objective third party can be very helpful in going through and making sure that balance across your requirements and there's an objective view of the fit. Likewise, internally, the skewing that can happen there, you can also get some external skewing. You may get one software provider or implementation partner who, frankly, are just better presenters than another, and they can sort of skew the perception of it. And so, again, that's where an objective third party can be helpful to get you to see, especially if that third party has experience with that particular software and that particular implementation partner in other instances. And the last thing in terms of software fit you'll want to look at is a little bit of return on investment. And what we mean here is to think beyond just the cost and the value we get out of it. There's some straight efficiency calculations that you can look at in terms of my enterprise is growing, and if I keep my current ERP, I know I have to add 10 people to my staff to line up with the growth. If I go to a new ERP, we gain some additional functionality and efficiency, and so instead of 10, I only have to add 2. That can be a pretty straight return on investment calculation. It's the intangible things that are much harder to add into the return on investment calculation, like the fit and appeal to new employees, because it seems like you have a more modern package than a black and green screen. It's things like the functionality that you can't even do today that you can do tomorrow because you have an ERP that better fits what your business needs or what your enterprise needs. It's capabilities to grow your business in a way that you're being limited today because you're not able to access data or reporting in a timely enough fashion because of limitations with your existing ERP that are harder to factor into that return on investment. And so sometimes, again, a third party can help you see those opportunities differently than you see them today, because of you're so involved in your enterprise. It's a little hard to know what others are doing and how they can fit with the needs that you may have. And so that can sometimes then you can get help to understand a bigger picture around return on investment beyond just a straight calculation of an efficiency gain from a new package. Okay. So next, I want to take a little time and talk a little bit about some key steps around a successful modernization or migration and things to do and not to do. Probably the single biggest question that you need to ask is, are you really ready to change? A lot of times, leadership teams will nod their heads and say they're ready, but it's hard to appreciate the difficulty and the time commitment that will happen. It's almost as important to make sure that they're aligned around why they're changing. I don't want to go too deeply into change management here, but essentially, if your leadership team is not all aligned around why the change is needed and what change is going to happen and how it's going to happen, it can be very confusing for the enterprise. And we've seen many implementations struggle to be completed because there was a misalignment at the leadership level around why this is so important to do, or how it's going to be done, and what exactly the change is going to entail. So it's very important to go through and make sure that the leadership team, all levels of management, everyone is aligned around why this change is needed and they're ready to make the change. Second thing is make sure that you found the right partner. Again, from a software standpoint, from an integration standpoint, and even a potential third partner, an implementer standpoint, it's really important to make sure you've got a good, solid team to get this done. This is a major change in your enterprise. It's going to have a big impact on everyone. It's important to make sure you have the right team. Jump into this a little more. So when you think about the leadership team, are they bought in and ready? Can everyone clearly articulate leader by leader why the change is important? Even as simple as literally going around and asking everyone to articulate why the change is going to happen can be a helpful exercise to make sure that we're clearly bought in and they're willing to repeat it over and over again to the enterprise why the change is needed. Do you have an organizational change management plan in place? Does the enterprise even know what that means, and have they gone through this before? Have you had other big changes? It would be good to go back and look at other changes that occurred in your enterprise and what worked well and what didn't work well, and do what we call a pre-mortem as opposed to a post-mortem. Take the lessons learned from the last big change and make sure that you're ready to apply them to this change. And then think about, have you invested in the right amount of time in your requirements? It's interesting. Most of these exercises that we've gone through during the assessment phase, everyone is in a hurry to make the right decision. And then during the implementation phase, everyone wonders why we didn't take more time in the assessment phase. I've never heard anyone say, boy, I wish we would have really done that assessment faster. It's always, I wish we would have taken a little more time and made sure we understood better what we could and couldn't do before we got too far into this. So it's important to really be patient in the beginning and take your time and make sure that you've got a good understanding of what this software is going to be able to do for you and what it can't do. Once you get midway through, it's very hard to start to back that down and unwind it. It can be done, but it's much better to take your time up front. I think it's the old measure twice and cut once axiom that we're putting at play here. Take your time, make sure you understand the fit, make sure you've really delved into the capabilities, you've defined your requirements well, and again, that's where a third party can come in handy by going through and really asking some of the difficult questions and making sure you've really unearthed your requirements in the fit. On the due diligence piece, we've talked about this a little, but we're going to repeat it again. It's good to make sure you have the right fit. Is that stakeholders aligned to the matrix of requirements? When you go through that simple analogy I laid out earlier, and you've said this is a 5 on the importance scale and this is a 5 on the fit scale, do all the stakeholders agree? You want to make sure that you don't have, again, a small group that's agreed that these are the most important things, and then later you learn that the overall enterprise needed other things to be more important. It's very good to go through and make sure all your stakeholders across the enterprise are aligned around the most important fits to the least important fits, and how well the software is going to be able to do that. And then the last one, and this is one we run into frequently, do you really have a realistic plan for how you're going to run your business during this implementation? It's rare that we encounter an enterprise today where people have a lot of free capacity. Most people tend to be fairly busy in their job. Sometimes they're even overworked. They have more than they can handle. And so is it really realistic to think that your internal staff are going to be able to do a bunch of work around implementing a new system? Or do you need to think of some creative ways that you can create time for them, or you can temporarily augment staff to create time to be able to do this implementation work? Because it's not going to be all in the hands of the software. I've yet to find a piece of software that will magically plug in and download everything that needs to be done and your business is ready to go. They all take work to set up. They all take work to fit to your business. And the integrator that will know how to do some of that configuration, they are probably not signing up to set up every single vendor and every single accounts payable line and every single employee. They're going to assume that you're going to do most of that work. They'll show you how to do a few. They'll configure the form to fit the way you like to input the data, but then you have to go through and do all of that. And that's a fair amount of work to get that done from your internal employees. And so you want to make sure that you've factored in not just the cost of the software and the cost of the integrator or the cost of the implementer, but also your internal costs. And do you really have a realistic plan to provide the time for your staff to be able to do that? Let me touch a minute. I've mentioned words like integrator and implementer a couple times. So let me take a moment and clarify that around how you find a partner for this. So there's really a couple different things that go on here. There's a software provider that builds great software that can build a great ERP, and they build all the functionality into that ERP package. And then there are integrators that really specialize in configuring the software to fit your business, guiding you into how to load your data and teaching you how to use the software based on how the software is meant to function to run your business. The gap that we tend to find is that neither one of those are really owners' representatives. And unless you have a really strong internal implementation and change management team, you'll find a gap as you go through this. It could just be a project management gap. There could be a change management gap. And you could also miss an opportunity to provide process improvement and a better understanding of how to modernize your business while you're making these changes. A big change like an ERP system is a prime opportunity to have some process improvement and modernize other parts of your business. It'll naturally flow into what you're doing. But if you don't have the skill or the time, usually it's time, to really go through and understand how to make these changes and how to get that done in the work stream of getting the ERP implemented, you'll miss an opportunity. And what you don't want to do is spend hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of dollars on implementing a new ERP just to do things the way you've always done it and not gain the efficiency that you should be gaining as you put this new tool in place. So you'll need an integrator to help configure the software, because the software, again, the software provider typically doesn't do that. Sometimes they will, sometimes they have an integration team, and that's great, but you may find you need another second party to do that. We recommend a third party then to join that also, who can really help you run the project from your perspective, can be your representative, and can help with all the change management, the process improvement, a deeper level of training that needs to go on. One other nuance to that that we probably ought to touch on real quick is the data behind all of this. So if your enterprise has been in existence for a long time, let's say you're a 40-year-old enterprise, you have a lot of data. And so the question will become, do I migrate all that data into my new ERP system? Do I migrate it into a data warehouse, maybe a cloud-based data warehouse? Do I leave it on my old system? And how long can I access it? That's a big question around data. And a lot of times, the software provider or the integrator, they're not really focused on how to handle the data, or they're not skilled on how to set up a data warehouse. And so again, a third party can help you understand the options around the data. Should it be brought in? Should a summary of it be brought in? Should you leave everything in the existing system, or should you build some other storage methodology for the data? Okay, so speaking of missed opportunities and things that you can do as you're going through the ERP, let's touch on a minute ways you can evolve as you're putting in a new ERP system. So first of all, you should be gaining some greater efficiencies by changing to a more modern process. If you think about, I'll just use the AS400 as an example, that was very much a batch process. You would put in a batch of invoices, you would batch those all together, and then you would literally send them over to the department that would approve pay of those invoices, who would then batch them up and send them to a department to actually cut checks to pay them. In a modern system, that doesn't happen anymore. It's a simultaneous database. When you approve something, it gets approved, it automatically notifies that a check can be cut, and you may even pay it electronically. There's no actual check to write. So that's an opportunity to change and rethink how you do your business. It's an opportunity to transform some of the things around your business to become more data driven and not depend on a time of reports being produced at a certain period of time. The old way of thinking through an ERP is around once a week I get a report. Well, you can run reports real time in most modern ERP systems. You can get alerts real time if things aren't aligned the way they should be. If inventory is low or the candidate pipeline is low, you can get real time updates on those things. From a process improvement standpoint, one of the things we frequently hear is through the requirements gathering and the business process mapping, people will say, well, we understand our business so much better today than we did. Even if we don't migrate or modernize our ERP, we're going to make some business process changes that are going to help us a ton. This alone has been a very fruitful process. So make sure you take advantage. Don't look at the requirements gathering as drudgery. Look at it as an opportunity to really deep dive your business, really understand how are we doing things and why are we doing them that way, and is there an opportunity here to change for the better. The second thing is, in order to do that, you have to make sure that you're thinking with a mindset of trying to get away from how we've always done it. Not that the way you've always done it is bad. It may be excellent. You may want to stay with that, but you should at least question, are we doing things just because it's the way we've always done it, or can we do things differently than before? Okay, and then another point is around digital modernization. Businesses are generally shifting to more modern platforms. There are functionality that just didn't exist when the AS400 platform came out 31 years ago. You may be trying to bolt on packages to your current ERP, and it just doesn't function well. This is a good opportunity for you to get all of those things tied together and functioning in cohesion, instead of having all these workarounds and crutches to be able to make different parts of your business work well together. The other piece, I touched on this a little bit already, is the ability to be better at data-driven decision making, not making decisions based on a gut feel or how you've always done it, but instead really looking at data real time, day to day, and understanding what's going on in the business and where do we need to focus our attention, where do we need to improve things, what parts of the business should we consider not doing. All of those become more relevant and more easily accessible as you migrate to a modern platform. And I think it's very important to consider that. That's one of those intangible return on investment pieces that it's hard to consider, it's hard to weigh, because it's not something you're even currently able to do. Okay, so I'm again and again on the best ERP and how to find that right fit. So first thing to understand is you're not going to find 100% fit out there in the market that's perfect, exact to what your business needs. And my apologies to my friends on the software side who build these ERPs, that none of them is really 100% fit. You've got to find What we recommend you look at is what is the most mission critical functionality of my enterprise, find the best fit for that, and then work your way through the usefuls and the nice to haves. It's important to find the fit for the majority of what the enterprise needs, and just understand that you'll be stuck on making a decision if you try to find something that's 100% exactly like what you have, especially if you've built a very customized system over time. It's probably not going to exist that you can find something that's 100% fit. And frankly, you don't want 100% fit, because part of doing this is to modernize and change the way you run your business. The last thing is, don't fall in love with the functionality. So what we've seen sometimes is that there will be a particular aspect of an ERP that someone will fall in love with. It's a perfect fit for what they want. They're really excited about this new feature or functionality, but the overall ERP is really not the right fit for them. It's important to not get lost in that particular detail. Don't get enamored in one particular piece of functionality. You have to be able to take a step back and look at it holistically. How does it fit overall? One thing could be 100%. If everything else is 10%, it's probably not going to be good. And then the last thing is, make sure you're right size. Sometimes it's nice to think about a larger ERP package if you're running a fairly small enterprise, because you love the flexibility and all the things it can do. That may just be a huge burden for you to try to go through and customize or make that fit what you do. There is a right size for every enterprise. And that's part of being able to figure out, am I a small business, a medium-sized business? Am I a very large enterprise? Do I need a small or a medium or a large enterprise size package? It's the same thing as understanding that you have like industry functionality around ERPs. Again, some are better suited for projectized organizations. Some are better suited for nonprofits. Some are better suited for public entities. And so understanding which vertical it fits best, along with which size of organization it fits best, are part of understanding how to right size that. One thing you want to look at too is to think about how your enterprise is changing and growing, because there are many of these ERP systems that work well in phases. You can bring in some initial chunk of it to do just your financial piece, and then later you can add on other functionality as your enterprise grows and new requirements come to light and you need new functionality. If you can find the ERP that has that, but you can put it in place in phases, oftentimes that's a really good fit for your enterprise. Okay, then in terms of being successful with your partner selection, there's a few things we would touch on that we think will be helpful. The configuration partner is a critical part of the team. You want to make sure that you get to meet the person who's going to be involved in the configuration. A lot of times it's the person and the fit within your organization that matters. This is somebody that you're probably going to be working with fairly closely for anywhere from 6 weeks to 2 years. Having a good personality fit is pretty important. Make sure that you get to meet the person that will most likely be assigned to your project. And you want to make sure they have some form of process. The person and the process are both equally important. Do they have a process? Have they taken people like you through a conversion before? Do they know how to configure the system to meet the majority of your needs? What experience do they have? It's also good to know that they have some industry experience as well. If you're a heavy road construction enterprise, are you dealing with a configuration partner that's done several heavy road construction conversions? If you're a nonprofit, does the configuration partner have nonprofit experience? Maybe they worked for a nonprofit in their previous role. Those are the kind of things you should consider as you select a configuration partner. Availability, geographic location, cost of travel. Those are all things that we would consider as we evaluate and assess whether this is the right configuration partner. And then the second piece, again, back to that, more of that implementer role. Do you need an owner's rep to hold you accountable? Do you need an owner's rep to help you improve process and to manage this vendor, the software vendor and the configuration vendor? Do you have someone that has the capacity in your organization to play that role, or do you need an outside third party? I equate this a little bit to construction in some respects. Are you an enterprise that's building one building every 20 years? You probably need an expert to help you with that. Even if you run projects, you probably still need someone who has knowledge in the building industry to be your owner's rep. It's similar here. Unless someone within your organization has been through a few ERP replacements, it's good to have an owner's rep that has that experience on your side. Okay, I think that's everything that we had to present today. Again, thank you very much for your time. I hope this was a good, helpful overview and gave you a few things to at least think about. Stephanie, anything to add?
I did have one question come through, if you'd be okay answering that.
Sure.
How do I know if I have vetted enough software implementers to make the right decision on a partner?
Well, the easy answer I would give you is when you're tired. When you're exhausted, you've probably talked to enough. Now, a more serious answer would be, if you feel like you have a good understanding of the systems or the software that are closely aligned to your industry, that's probably a fairly small set. And I would talk to each of those and make sure that you've vetted those. And maybe there's one or two that are close related that you'll want to talk to. We find that, when we do an assessment, quite honestly, we have done this enough and we've looked at enough ERP systems that we feel like we have a pretty good knowledge of the general industry. So we can fairly quickly hone it down to 5 or 6. And then within a few questions, we narrow that down to 3 that we do in-depth assessments with. I would recommend you at least have 3 that you have do demos on site, get to know you fairly well.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much for tuning in to today's presentation. Look out for a follow-up email tomorrow that will include a copy of the recording from today, in addition to a small survey about your experience. Should you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you so much for joining us.